So yeah, tonight the idea is to explore two subjects which kind of link together, as has been outlined in the invite. So one of them is like government entrepreneurship. What should government be doing more or perhaps less of? And the other one, which kind of relates, is the impact of digital technology on government. I mean, digital has a huge impact on doing away with the middleman and the intermediaries in the private sector and business world. And could this have, or should it be having, a similar impact on how government functions? So yeah, to briefly introduce the panel, if you don't know any of them already. First, to my right is Douglas Carswell, the MP for the Conservative Party and Clacton, but very proficient blogger as well, and who's written a very interesting book on, it's called The End of Politics and the Birth of iDemocracy, something that I've recently finished, and he talks a lot about the impact of digital technologies and how this could shape government in the future. And then following on, we've got Paul Dowling, who's coming at this from the sort of, I guess, the cold face of entrepreneurship, in that he runs a successful and a well-known platform for startups called Dreamstake, which operates in London mainly, but nationally and internationally as well. So you get Paul is sort of very much the representative of startups and entrepreneurs, I guess. And Andy Williamson to the right again, who is again a very sort of proficient blogger, and sort of maybe comes at this from more the academic side, and in really having explored and written in depth about the impact of social technologies and digital media on government and around the world. And then lastly, but not least, finally on the right, Matthew Elliott, who is, I guess, well known for forming pressure groups. Is that the right way to describe it? And successful lobbying campaigns. Most well known is Taxpayers Alliance, which I think started way back in 2004.
Yes.
And then Big Brother Watch, and then running the No to AV campaign, and probably various other ones. A lot of experience advising people in this country and overseas governments as well, in, I guess, utilising modern technologies and running successful campaigns. So there we are, that's the panel. I'll just leave it to Marcus to explain a little bit what we're doing here with the polls and the live streaming, and then we can kick off and hopefully get quite a few questions coming from the audience as well. Okay, thanks.
Hi there everyone. I run the Real Debate Club in tandem with Pivotal Tribes, which Jonathan runs. There's a few things to explain. First of all, we've signed up to this snazzy system that enables you to vote via your phone. So what we're going to do, whilst it's going to be a panel debate, but we're going to want to take a poll of opinion beforehand. So if you could get your phones out, and initially we're going to take a vote on this one. You can either text in or you can do it via the browser. So this is fairly experimental. We want to introduce this because the topic of the debate is about digital democracy. And this is effectively canvassing your opinion via a text or something onto your phone. Like I say, I suggest if you have a browser, if you go to pollev.com, then you simply enter the number, whether you're for, against, or abstain. There we go, bang, someone's checked it out. So before, digital democracy, give power to the people, the government have had their day. 80% for, 20 against, with only 7 votes, and now it's balancing out a little bit. It's like commentating on races. Because it's a multifaceted sort of panel discussion, the next one is the government is not doing enough to support UK startups. So now, whichever means you used last time, you can do them again, different numbers I'm afraid. So for 70267, against 70286, and abstain 7058. And whilst we're doing that, I'll explain there's also an organisation here called Tickle, which is a new startup, which it's like a sort of, it's like a video Twitter for opinionated people to offer 30-second comments on whatever they like. And if other people like or don't even not like what they said, if it's tickled them in some way, they just click tickle, and so you can build a sort of, you can sort of get and then you can reply it via a 30-second video too. We've just taken some tickles beforehand whilst we were all mingling around, so we're going to play a couple of tickles as part of the debate. We can also post questions onto the Twitter feed to DigDem, and I will follow the tweets and try and involve some of them. We're also live streaming it so people will be able to ask questions. And more importantly, you guys that have actually come here will also obviously be able to ask questions. So if you've got something burning to say, stick your hand in the air and I'll try and involve as many people as possible. 32 people, good. So the government's not doing enough to support startups. We have 63% that don't think the government's doing enough to support startups. 25% against and 13% abstained. Without further ado, let's kick this off with a question from the floor first. Is anyone itching to ask a question or make a comment to start the debate? Yes, yes, please.
Marcus, 2 points, if I may. The first is that showing percentages on a base that's less than 100 is totally unrecommended by the Royal Statistical Society. And secondly, the number of people voting is immaterial compared to the representativeness or otherwise of the respondents. So whilst what you've been doing is great fun and very entertaining, I'd like to suggest that it's completely useless. Thank you.
I'm glad that you found it great fun and very entertaining, mate. But I sense there was a little bit of sarcasm in that comment. May I take a question from there?
Who will police the network?
Who will police?
Well, the network and the system.
Who will police the network and the system? Sorry?
Who will police the police?
Who will police the police? Can you add a bit more colour to that?
Well, the question is who decides who's in office? The authority of the network who decides what vote gets cast, which one doesn't. Is it filtered? Does it not get filtered? It's not going to be a perfect system because it's going to be based on human.
So you're saying what, with a pure digital democracy, which I hand over to Douglas Carswell to answer that.
So there may be some misapprehension. I've advocated radical change to our rotten system of deferential democracy. I've argued that we have an essentially 19th century system of democracy trying to hold to account a 21st century size state, and it doesn't work. However, in advocating iDemocracy, I'm in no sense suggesting this on polling day every day to decide on macroeconomic issues or other issues. So if I could just say that this is fun, the means of aggregating opinion by the click of a mouse is interesting, but this isn't really what iDemocracy is about, with respect. I think iDemocracy has two profound changes. First of all is the way that politics is conducted. We're used to having political parties in our democracy. Why? Because they are necessary to aggregate opinion and to aggregate votes. The internet means you can aggregate opinion and aggregate votes without political parties. That has enormous consequences. The second thing is it takes away the need to have guardians, as you put them, aggregating opinion for us. Isn't it a paradox that whenever public policy is decided for us, it means a tiny elite decides what's in the public interest? Actually, the beauty of the internet is that you can do collectivism without the state. You can use the great collective brain that we have to make complex decisions in a way that's accessible to everyone without leaving it to the wisdom of Michael Gove to decide on your child's education or Jeremy Hunt to decide on your healthcare. But that's something profoundly very different to this, and to regard clickocracy as the model, is cantering off in the wrong direction.
Would any of the other panel like to come on before I take another question?
Well, I was just going to say I thought that's what the Daily Mail was for.
Thank you.
If
you wouldn't mind, maybe later, I just want to involve as many people as possible. And the gentleman over here with his hand up, please.
Douglas, aren't you really, all you're advocating is not something new, it's not the internet or something, all you're really advocating is what's called the free market?
Well, the free market is, I think, the best form of collectivism that we have. It allows people to aggregate decisions by pursuing their own interest. For For example, if I go into a telephone shop, I can make a very sophisticated choice about buying a technological product without knowing anything about technology and get a good deal because of the decisions of tens of thousands of other Londoners through the market. We're about to be able to make collective decisions using the free market of ideas in a way that was previously unimaginable. If you think I'm jumping ahead of myself, do a quick Google search to find the answer to something. You're skimming the collective wisdom of tens of millions of people and getting an answer far better than an elite group of technocrats could ever provide it.
Matthew Elliott.
I'm a big fan of the free market, as well as Douglas, and the key element of the free market, of course, is competition. And I think the key thing that's changed in politics over the past several decades is the fact there's more choice now than there was before. And let me perhaps briefly explain. If you go back to the 1950s, basically we just had a two-party system with Labour and the Conservatives, and people basically had to join mass membership political parties to get involved in politics. And we've seen a huge fall in the membership of political parties. And for example, the Conservatives have gone from having about 5 million members in the 50s to now about 100,000 members. But we've seen the rise of single-issue pressure groups, be it Taxpayers Alliance, Big Brother Watch, Greenpeace, Amnesty International, Oxfam, or what have you. And that's been the big change, is that competition that's come in. I set up a campaign recently and somebody asked me, who mandated you to set up that campaign? And the fact is you don't need a mandate, and the great thing about the internet is the fact that the cost of campaigning has come down. So when I first started my campaigning 10 years ago, basically pre-internet being widely used, campaigning was expensive. You needed to print leaflets, print magazines, send them out by post, very, very expensive. Now all you need is basically an internet connection and you can go. So I think the competition is the key element, and that's been great for politics.
Andy.
I don't disagree with the idea of a free market, I just question whether we have one. Let's take Douglas' example of mobile phones. Is that a free market when Vodafone tries to lock me into a 2-year contract? No, not exactly. They have a lot of power, it's not open. And if free markets are so successful, why are our banks so fucked up? So we need, going back to the first question, we do need to make sure we've got good checks and balances in place. And when we look at this from a political perspective, Matthew's absolutely right. If you want to set up a campaigning organisation now, you need a shed and an internet connection and a dog to keep you company while you build the demand and create the campaign. But it's cheap, it's really easy to do. But I tell you what, if you want to get into Parliament in the UK, forget it. Because we have a voting system that actually ensures that the status quo is maintained. Look at the Green Party in the UK. It's taken them how long to claw their way in to get 1 MP? It's unbelievable. The amount of votes you need to get 1 MP in this country is ridiculous. And until we reform the voting system to something that's actually representative and proportional, we won't actually have a free market in politics.
And the people rejected that completely.
Well, no, they didn't reject a proportional system. We never voted on a proportional system.
We've got a lively audience member. Happens to be my father. I'm that. Yes, please.
I strongly agree with it. I think one of the reasons why the country is in such a mess is because there are a lot of corporate parasitical interests who basically run things that ought to be a free market for themselves. So we get this in banking, but particularly in politics. We have vested interests that prevent choice and competition. 7 out of 10 seats in this country is a one-party fiefdom. You stand a greater chance in this country if you're an MP of losing your seat because you fall out with your party bosses than because you're rejected by the voter. So I think we do need choice and competition, but I dispute the idea that the way to do this is to change necessarily the voting system or to have PR. I can't help noticing that in countries with PR lists, they have an even more out-of-touch parasitical kleptocracy running the country. I think what we need is to crowdsource and open up the parties. Political parties should use open primaries so that every single person decides who gets to stand as the Conservative candidate or the Labour candidate. We need a recall mechanism so that we can fire politicians between elections. We need to crowdsource legislation. If you go onto Wikiversity, you'll see a couple of experiments where people have put together draft bills to put before the House of Commons. I can't help noticing that various pages of Wikipedia are better written than many of the laws in the House of Commons. It can be done. So I do think we need change. But I have to say, for years and years and years, the same set of people have been saying the answer to all of this is proportional representation. I think the internet's a little bit bigger than that. It profoundly changes the way you aggregate opinion and harness votes. You can do politics without political parties, and that will force political parties to become, if you like, open source rather than closed source systems.
Okay, before we take the next question from the floor, and I'd like you to start thinking about ones involving the government and what they're doing to help the startup community, because it's a sort of multi-stranded, so I kind of want to keep it sort of between the two topics. But now we're going to do a tickle that was recorded earlier. So let's see how this one works out.
Look, good government is less government. The government should do minimal things such as national defence, national, foreign and home affairs. Politicians can't run anything apart from perhaps their own barns. People will always thrive and prosper with less government and lower taxes. It's a fact. Lower taxes increase the government's income. As far as I'm concerned, it is politically illiterate to say otherwise.
Would you like to comment on this? Would you like to comment on this one? Or would you like to wait for the one more related to one related to entrepreneurship?
Do you want me to agree with the last comment?
Would you like the government?
I'll wait for startups.
Would you like the government to fuck off? Would you like the government to fuck off?
Well, I try and defeat it frequently. So read into that what you will. I'm a libertarian. I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand's. I believe that basically throughout human history, elites have parasited off the rest of us. The reason why we've had this exponential increase in living standards in the past 200 years is because we created a social system where we can restrain the parasitical elites. But unfortunately, they're finding ways of short-circuiting the safeguards against them for their own advantage. So I was born in 1971. This country is so much better than it was in 1971 in so many ways. There's more freedom, more choice, more toleration. You can do things. People are free to work and live where they want in ways that were unimaginable previously. But the one thing that hasn't got better in this country is the stuff run by the state. I can go to a supermarket that's open 24 hours a day, but if I want to see, a state-funded doctor, I have to stand in line and wait. The state is not good at providing things. We can do without as much government. The state, it doesn't even do what it says it's going to do. It doesn't even provide the equity and the social justice that it claims it's going to do. It's a failed model, and I think we're going to have to cope with much less government, and I think this is a very good thing.
Thank you, Douglas. I'm going to move on to something related to startups, and we've got a question entered from Meetup from John Sandel. Is John Sandel here? No. Well, the question was about what's the government doing, and what can we do to encourage young people into entrepreneurship, especially that don't have savings and can't afford to live in London. Startup loans seem designed for bricks and mortar businesses, not ideal for tech startups. Can I invite Paul Dowling to comment on this?
Can you hear me with this microphone? I think it does work, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think the government's doing a hell of a lot to help startups at the moment. In fact, I think a lot of the old excuses have gone away. So the startup loan scheme, I agree. Lord Young's original idea of it was around about 2.5k each average, and really didn't want to aim it at particularly sophisticated businesses. But actually, the average loan size is going up all the time. So there's been two changes to the scheme. One is that it's now 30 and under, and the other change is that it's certainly up to 10k and often a lot more. Now, what you're getting with that is you could create what's called a minimum viable product, which in the old days used to be called a prototype, for less than 10k. And this is really part of the startup methodology these days. What you have to do is you have to create a prototype, market test it, get some what's called product market fit to establish that people will buy the service, and that's what I think startup loans can be used for. But there's a lot of other stuff being done as well. So there's incentives to investors. So there's what's called the SEIS scheme, where investors get their risk underwritten by a tune of something like 78%. So I think the UK at the moment is actually a very good place to set up a startup. I think that what we've got to do now is build confidence and make sure that we have a pipeline of young people who want to become entrepreneurs, because it's been so bad for so long that nobody has wanted to do it. But I've got a 16-year-old son, and I'm really quite pleased that he wants to become an engineer and a scientist, and a lot of his friends seem to be doing the same. So I think that schools are now turning out people who are more likely to become tech entrepreneurs.
Thank you for that. Before we ask Douglas, would either of you gentlemen like to comment on that?
Yeah, I was quite curious listening to that conversation, because I don't think we do nearly enough. I think we could do an awful lot more. One of the things that really worries me is when we're talking about young people and we're offering them loans, that's pretty terrifying. We're not offering them, it's not just cash, it's support. I think we've got to offer them mentoring and training and support. You know, we're sitting here in Shoreditch, Old Street. This is part of Hackney. I live in Hackney. It doesn't look like the Google campus. It's full of young kids who are leaving school with, frankly, a crap education, without the skills.
The startup loan scheme actually does come with mentoring attached as a condition.
But the loan is off-putting. We need to go back to some real core business grants to get people moving. We need to do much more to get young people into innovative environments. We need to get them into not just a culture of innovation, but a culture of thinking differently. And actually, I think we've also got to look at the big elephant in the room, which is the banking sector. The banking sector in this country is frankly criminal. They're destroying businesses in this country. And there's no point getting a £2,500 startup loan, because if you do make a success of it, the bank's going to give you nothing. Where are you going to go? So we've got problems at both ends of the food chain.
Okay, it's good. We have a question. Is it related to this gentleman in the black top? Yeah.
So the C2BT thing's slightly at odds. If we're looking at the benefits of having less government, but then looking at government being the people who are going to fund this, where does the panel feel that the crowdsourcing and crowdfunding come into this kind of thing? Would that not possibly be a better way, so that it's not part of the government?
I think that's right, and I think we're world leaders at the moment in crowdfunding, because we're one of the countries where it's legal for a start. So in the States you can't do equity crowdfunding, whereas here you can, and we've got companies that offer that. And so there are capital is now available for very early stage startups, both through startup loans with some of the faults that you've described, but also with crowdfunding. The crowdfunding can't fund all types of startups, because they have to be startups that have some kind of popular appeal for people, for the man in the street to put money into them.
Okay, before we take another question on this topic, I think, given that we've got the Right Honourable MD Douglas Carswell here, I think it would be interesting. I think we'd all like to know what his view on this is.
I'm certainly not right, nor am I honourable. I have no intention of ever accepting status as a Privy Councillor. The really encouraging thing in all of this is that there's good empirical evidence to show that young people today are far more entrepreneurial than in the past. Many more of them, according to surveys that I've read in City AM, want to set up businesses as an aspiration compared to their parents or grandparents. That's enormously encouraging. But we ask, what can government do about this? Well, surprise, surprise, the banking system is not very good at providing cheap credit. Why? Because they set the price of credit, the interest rates artificially low for 20 years, and so the supply of credit has dried up. Go figure. So the government has responded to the problem caused by excessively cheap credit by, in effect, setting up a state system of credit rationing. And it may help a lucky few, who tick the boxes and get the right sort of mentor, and good luck to them. But I think a far more significant development is crowd funding. I think that was far more likely to spot the winners. The wisdom of the crowd, I think, is much superior to the cleverest civil servant, even the cleverest minister, even Michael Gove, if he was in charge of that department. But I think a really significant thing that we need to do is not just focus on cheap credit. If cheap credit made us rich, this country would be absolutely booming. We've had 20 years of cheap credit, that's why we're in this mess. What we really need to do is get government off people's backs when it comes to all that other stuff that young companies, small companies want to do. Take, for example, the risk you take as a young company when you take on a new employer. If you face the threat of an expensive tribunal, you're either going to keep it in the family or employ mates or not employ anyone at all. We need to transform the regulatory environment so that people who create wealth no longer need to seek the permission of quangocrats in order to produce the wealth that keeps the whole system going.
Thank you, Douglas. Matthew Elliott, just to remind you, he's the founder of the Taxpayers Alliance.
I'm very interested in how popular culture can change society, and it's interesting, lots of people on the right often attack the BBC for good reason, but one thing they've done very well in recent years, I think, is The Apprentice, and Dragon's Den. And Dragon's Den, I think, has inspired a lot of people to become entrepreneurs. But I would be quite...
Can you hear it back then?
No.
No.
Says it's on.
I would be quite reluctant for the government to start doing direct grants to businesses, because I believe that the government isn't good at picking winners. But what I would like to see, as you say, founder of Taxpayers Alliance, is tax breaks. If people are going to put money into businesses, if they're going to invest in businesses, perhaps give them some tax breaks to do that. And actually, I believe that if people are investing their own money in them, they'll actually make better decisions than some government bureaucrat, basically deciding which business is good and which business is bad.
Battery's gone flat. There's the thing about technology, isn't it?
Thank you. Just the gentleman over here in the sort of purpley t-shirt.
What I'd like to know is, why should a fireman in Middlesbrough or a sales guy in Blackburn fund a crazy idea I have or a crazy idea any other guy has in this room? And I'd bring that back to you. Why should this be government funded at all?
Well, I think in general a light touch is a good thing, and I agree with the comments about crowdfunding, for example. But I think we're talking about relatively small amounts that are going into startups. So most of the taxpayers' money that's been going into this is as a stimulus, really, to really put in place the ecosystem. Because of what the problem we've had in the UK or in Europe as a whole has really been a problem of lack of support and ecosystem. So I think the government's got it about the right balance. They're putting relatively small amounts in. They're stimulating investment through tax breaks, through the SEIS and EIS scheme. They're putting relatively small amounts of millions into the startup loan scheme. And they're spending a small amount of money sort of banging the drum around Tech City and about initiatives like that. And they've made quite a big impact, I think, just doing that.
Thanks, Paul. Andy wants to come in, and then Douglas, and then we'll move back to voting.
I think I'd like to make the point even more direct. If you put 10 grand into the startup and it's successful and it grows into a successful company, it employs you, your family, your kids, it pays taxes, the money comes back. It's a good investment. We're investing in people's futures. I don't think we have to talk about a lot of money when we're putting public money into things. We've got to be careful with it. We shouldn't be profligate. But actually, let's be clear.
Should it not be a free choice to put money in? People shouldn't be forced to hand over taxpayers' their money to fund something they have no interest in. If it's a free choice and you put money into
happens all the time.
Well, that comes back to the ridiculous argument that I won't fund a state school because I send my children to a private one, or I won't fund a hospital because I've got Bupa. It's a ridiculous argument.
Thank you for that. And Douglas, did you want to come in, or should we take?
Just very briefly, I work in the House of Commons, and my office block is known as Portcullis House, and it was built by government experts in the mid-90s, and they built it so that it would be an office block that could accommodate people's needs for decades to come. Not only do they double the budget while building it, you can't get a mobile phone signal in it. The idea that these clowns are going to be able to second guess the new innovations that we need and to allocate credit and to pick winners is absurd. It's not just wrong, it's also immoral that one group of people should be favoured by the state with cheap credit at the expense of others. It is deeply and profoundly immoral. Incidentally, the cheap credit subsidy doesn't actually go to help the startups. It helps big hedge funds borrow money, invest in it. We've spent years through the cheap credit system actually subsidising the buying of Porsches in West London. It's a profoundly immoral and rotten system.
Thank you, Douglas. And then we're going to take a question from this gentleman at the front wearing the blue jacket.
Well, sorry, the blue one.
Navy black jacket. Navy one.
Yeah. Just a comment, just following up on that. We're in a difficult ground in that we need enough investment to take us to the next level, and therefore crowdfunding or the loans are no good. EIS would be perfect, SCIS would be perfect, but what's happened is the venture capital money has now gone, and the SCIS and EIS money has moved into a venture capital space because it's got so much money in there now. A fund manager will allocate it, and what they're doing is they're allocating it to businesses that are already proven and just get a 10% return. So all of that seed money that we could do with has suddenly vanished.
So the question surrounding the different types of funds that are available traditionally for startups, and the gentleman suggests that the money that normally goes, this is for the benefit of the people at the back. I don't know, can you hear questions when they're raised, I think? So the questions surrounding what money is now available for the seed capital?
Well, I mean, you're really talking about angel investment, and I think the problem is with angel investment is that it's very hard to identify angels because they are wealthy people who keep themselves well hidden, basically. But you know, I believe there is there is a fair amount of angel investment available. I think less so. Is your business a tech business?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's fairly specialist still, and you know, in the UK, there aren't a huge amount of tech investors who come up through internet businesses like they have in the States. So you're talking about a relatively small number of people with the amount of money to invest in 100k or a few 100k, and they're hard to find, basically.
Thanks, Paul. Does anyone else like to comment on that point? Shall I move on to another one? Okay, let's take something from Twitter as soon as we set up this thing. So, JP-GK, are they in the house? No? Okay. Well, maybe they're watching on the live stream, which is quite exciting. So they suggested entrepreneurship in schools to make them want to start their own biz. Do we think that there should be a greater focus on sort of teaching entrepreneurship and encouraging entrepreneurship in schools? Would anyone like to take that? Would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think the best thing we can do to encourage people to become entrepreneurs is to teach them to think for themselves. And you know, I think in too many schools the state is not doing that. If you were to put entrepreneurship on the curriculum and you were to sort of you know, goodness knows what mess the Department for Education would make of it. Yeah, personally, I think if we want to ensure that people have the right skills, we need to think seriously about either getting rid of the national curriculum entirely or having a series of a dozen different competing curriculums. When I was growing up, my parents weirdly at that time insisted that I learn to touch type. It at the time was not thought to be a skill that a boy would need. It was thought to be a skill that some people would acquire in order to become secretaries after leaving school. Touch typing was only put on the curriculum really quite late. The idea that, you know, experts who design the curriculum are going to be able to decide what skills people need in the future is I think, ridiculous. We need to think again about this idea about having a national curriculum. What we do need to do is to make sure that people have the foundations for achievement, the ability to do maths, the ability to think for themselves, the ability to construct a rational logical argument, not something I've just done. But you know, the idea that by putting it on the national curriculum we're going to somehow create a nation of entrepreneurs, you know, if only.
Yeah, so I think encouraging a spirit of thinking for themselves. Would you like to comment on that, Andy?
We're sharing a microphone between three here with the technology failure. I'm really passionate about education. For 5 years I was on the New Zealand Computing Qualifications Advisory Board, and before coming to the UK I was on the New Zealand Government's Digital Strategy Board. A big part of what we were doing was looking at the whole of society impact of digital, so it was right from business to education. Of course you can't separate the two. And there's a couple of things that really worry me about the education system. One is we seem to think that computing is a science subject. We keep talking about teaching our kids computer science. Well, for every computer scientist we need 1,000 designers and we need 1,000 software engineers. And that ain't science, boys, that's art. You know, it's a creative industry. We've got to start getting our heads around the fact that creative industries aren't dirty and scary and things for people we don't like to do. It's really important that we get a mix of skills. As Douglas said, you've got to be, you know, you've got to get maths and literacy and the interpersonal stuff, the debating stuff, but you've also got to get the creative stuff in there. And entrepreneurship is just part of that. It's a bit of science, it's a bit of art, it's a bit of magic. But above all, it's about learning your place in the world and having the confidence to go out and make decisions and be equipped with the faculties and the information to do those things. We don't teach political literacy very well. We don't teach information literacy very well. Those are two key skills for this debate tonight. We've got to get better at giving our kids a real kick start in life by giving them the real skills, hard and soft, that they're going to need. Entrepreneurship is just one of them, but it is important.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I just want to invite as much comment from the floor. There's two gentlemen at the back, but I'll come to you next if that's okay. And the gentleman sitting down with the beard.
The government actually undermined part of that, teaching kids how to use computers, because the most disadvantaged or socially excluded kids were basically written off when the government abolished Bector and withdrew the £300 million
Abolished what, sorry?
Bector, which was the organisation that looked after IT in schools, and abolished the £300 million home access programme, which provided the most disadvantaged kids with a laptop. So unless you want to create a level playing field, you've got to, well, ensure that IT is available to all, not just to the few that can afford it.
Would you like to comment on that? Do you know specifically about what's happened in terms of government expenditure towards encouraging technology laptops?
Since 2002, the state, I'll call it the state because it happened under whatever colour is that's the people pretending they're running the system. You know, it's the state that did it. Since 2002, the amount of money we spend on education has doubled. But you're absolutely right. They're not very good at turning those pounds into learning. They either get people to learn the wrong thing, or they do it so arbitrarily that there are discrepancies, and people talk about postcode lotteries. And, yeah, absolutely. In my constituency, you see first-hand evidence of that. The state is not very good at providing these things, which is why I think we've got to stop regarding the provision of probably one of the most important things we can think of, the education of our children. We should stop believing that we can leave that entirely to the sort of people who built Portcullis House. You know, they are not good at it. And what we need to do, I think, is take control and say, if on your iPad you can have exactly the apps you want, yeah, why can your child, I don't know if you've got one, I've got a 4-year-old, why can't I have a say? Instead of her having a national curriculum, why can't I have a personalised curriculum for her, selected by input from the parents and the teachers to meet her needs? You know, why can't you have a personalised curriculum for every child now? The digital revolution means that is possible to do that. And so precisely the problems that you point out, where some people are denied the basic skills that they need, we can do something about it. But so long as we look for the man in Whitehall to solve the problems, we're never going to get the outcomes we want, and we're certainly never going to get equity.
I mean, this country has held art and creativity in contempt for all my life as an artist, and for all my friends. Like, you know, we live in not only opposition to the state, but also opposition to the public. So until there is I think we've begun to see a change in attitudes towards both art and creativity in this country. But it needs to go a lot further, and that can start in education. But the government seem to have absolutely no respect for it at all.
Would anyone like to comment on that? Andy, please.
I'll make a really quick comment because I think you know my view on it. But actually, I was reading the Nesta report that was out today, and if you take their definition of the creative industries, which is to stretch it to the creative people that work outside what we formally define as creative industries, it's about 11% of this country's GDP. That's fairly significant. That matters. So why do we treat it so badly?
Okay, yeah, so to expand on that, apparently we're treating the creative industry, which is apparently set... Yeah, with disdain. That's the point that I wanted to see if anyone else wants to comment on. Are we treating creative people with disdain? Douglas?
Well, Dave Cameron let Steve Hilton go to California. He's a very creative person and really appreciated, but beyond that, I don't know.
Paul?
Well, I think you're hearing a lot of talk at the moment about combining creative industries with technology. I mean, people hold this up as our USP, really, that in the US you've got the creative industries in, I guess the wrong way around, in South California, and the technology people up in the north, and they're not side by side. Whereas in London, we've got the advantage of having the fashion industry sitting... The fashion industry sitting side by side here in London with software developers and technology people, and I think it is a great opportunity to create some really great startups by combining creativity and technology. Can I just say, I think it's worse than that, because I think actually if you want to be a startup entrepreneur, you're not taken seriously either. And the problem is the whole system is really geared to creating bankers and professionals. So startup founders, I see them down here every day in the cafe, have exactly the same problems as my friends who are artists. They're not taken seriously. Their parents think it's highly risky and they would prefer they did something else. So there needs to be a sea change in attitude really about what people decide to do for their career choices.
I really agree with that. I mean, I can look at this personally. When I was 18 and choosing my university subjects, I wanted to do fine art. My dad basically said, no bloody way, it's a waste of time, you're not going to get anywhere with it, it's too high risk, it's a stupid thing to do. So I ended up doing computing. How ironic, because...
money earners in this area.
Yeah.
Fine art is one of the things that Britain does very well internationally.
To the logic of my dad, it was a very bad idea, so I ended up doing something sensible like computing. And how ironic that actually you realise they're effectively the same thing in a lot of ways.
I just want to move this on, and no better way to play another tickle.
And I was thinking in reference to the Arab Spring, where people trying to revolt against oppressive governments have been using social media and the digital technology around that to enhance their cause, and we can learn about what was happening in Syria and Egypt as a result of what they were doing there. And I don't think it's so applicable in the UK.
And let's see.
So that's to do with sort of social media, the sort of Arab uprising, this, that, and in fact, is Duncan here? Would you like to reiterate what your core point from that was? Because there was a little bit of background noise. And
I was saying that, hypothesising that perhaps these technologies are used in different ways in different parts of the world, and we use social media as a bit of fun and might do a bit of professional networking, whereas in the Arab Spring it was a way that they could express their desire for freedom with the outside world and stop being censored.
Okay, yeah, so there's perhaps differences in the way that social media cause uprisings in the sort of, in other areas, and perhaps it's not quite the same to expect that here. Matthew, you itching to carry on that?
I've been looking very closely at how different political campaigns in the UK are using social media, and I was in the US for the 3 weeks running up to the presidential elections, working on or seeing both campaigns in Florida. And what struck me was the fact that the UK is just so far behind. We're literally 15 or 20 years behind where US politics is in the use of social media to get the message out. And we're still basically, as political parties, and that's Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, basically still using the mass membership, party system, delivering leaflets, all this sort of stuff, rather than actually really engaging properly with Facebook and Twitter and what have you. So that has still to come in the UK, and I think the first campaign that does that, the first party that does that, will really sort of reap the dividends. But sadly, basically with all the political parties, they still see the digital element as something that basically the IT guy who looks after the printers and what have you does. It's still almost at that level, so it's a big change to be had. Also when it comes to the use of big data as well, again, a lot of the micro-targeting things I saw in the US. Just to briefly explain, I was over there with 12 kids from inner city schools, basically following both the Obama and the Romney campaigns. And what was fascinating was with the Romney campaign, if you had a street of 10 houses, basically the Romney kids would have to deliver leaflets or knock on all of the 10 houses. Whereas with the Obama campaign, they basically picked out 3 of them, and those are the 3 they needed to convince to actually come out to vote on the day. So that micro-targeting is huge and hasn't come to the UK yet, but I think will very soon.
Matthew,
can I just want to say 2 things. First is about the Egypt, to summarise it, point. The point we've got to remember here is it's about the social use of technology. Technology itself is nothing. Anyone who says, I have a piece of technology and will change the world is an idiot. It won't. It's the social appropriation of the technology that matters. And what we do is we use the technology we've got in the situation that we're in. So in the 1980s and 90s, we used photocopiers and telephones. And in the American Revolution, we used printing presses. What we use now is social media. I wouldn't dismiss the importance of social media to campaigns in the UK, though. I mean, there are a couple of really interesting examples. If you look at the London riots, the use of BlackBerry messaging to get the rioting going and the use of Twitter to get the cleanup going, they're micro examples compared to the scale of Egypt. But actually, Egypt in itself, Egypt wasn't a social media revolution. Social media was simply one tool that was used. It was a fuel for the revolution in that it accelerated, it was an accelerant, it made things happen more quickly. But Matthew's point about the campaigning, one of the problems we've got in the UK, but one of the differences we've got with the US is we have a very different campaigning system in the UK. We don't have that personality politics of the presidential campaign. So it's quite a different campaigning landscape, which is much slower to adopt the radical campaigning strategies of the US. And it's a lot harder to do some of the micro-tagging stuff that they were doing in the US here on that kind of scale.
Thank you.
It's
I don't think it's working. Is it?
It's tempting, isn't it, when you talk about the Arab Spring. You're looking at the impact of digital technology and the digital revolution overseas and saying, oh, it's having a big effect there, but it's not really going to change things here. It's just going to mean we all have a few tweets. We make a similar mistake with M-Pesa, the mobile phone revolution in Kenya and Uganda, where people can now use the mobile phone system to make payments. I think 1/3 of Kenya's gross domestic product will pass through mobile phones this year. But we're so focused on the transformative effect of the digital revolution overseas, we don't see the big changes that are going to happen and are starting to happen here. And in my book, The End of Politics and the Birth of Our Democracy, I talk about some of these things, and there are just 3 things that I want to try and impress upon you that I think are going to transform the political economy and make it vastly better. It's going to mean, as I said at the beginning, the ability to aggregate votes and opinion without the need for political parties, without a priesthood of pundits in Westminster telling us what to think. It will overthrow the role of opinion formers. All my life, I've had opinion formers telling me what to make about public policy issues. They're increasingly redundant. The blogs and Twitter are democratizing the commentariat, and we're beginning to have a proper democratic formation of opinion. It's not just that political parties and the way they campaign and the way they operate are going to have to change profoundly with open primaries and all these other innovations, but the very idea of who defines public policy and how it's defined is going to have to involve the public in a way it simply hasn't done since universal suffrage. It's also, and this is the thought I want to leave with, it's also going to have a transformative effect by what we mean by money. We know that M-Pesa is changing the meaning of money in Kenya and Uganda, But what about the future of the George Osborne pound? The reason why the state has grown so big is because the state is able to manipulate the money supply in order to transfer money from you and me to them. Once you move into a world where M-Pesa isn't just for farmers in Kenya and Uganda, but allows everyone to decide the medium of exchange, the ability of the state to do that goes. The idea of a tax base, the idea that there's this group of people that George Osborne can fleece every budget, it is going to go. The mobile tax base, the tax base will be like a river, it will flow away. It won't just be there in one tax jurisdiction to be marked. We're already seeing signs of it when corporations decide in which jurisdiction intellectual property is to be exploited. So it's going to change the whole idea that we can have big states expropriating 40 to 50% of our wealth and doing stuff without our consent. It's going to change this country every much as it changes the Northeast Africa and Central Africa. I hope it'll be slightly less volatile as it changes it.
Nice little tickle there, that worked well.
More than 3 minutes.
Yes, this gentleman here.
Digital democracy is something that I think most people in this room would like to see succeed. I've got a problem in that I don't know if it's going to work out for the poorest people in our society. Digital inclusion for them is sometimes very hard because they don't have the capacity to get online and have the conversations and to receive the information. The poorest people in this country don't have mobile phones or smartphones, and they don't have internet. And that is not just one part of it, it's also a lack of education about politics, about your community and your society. What can we do about that?
I think focusing on digital democracy, there would seem to be an immediate issue of the fact that the poorest in society wouldn't be able to access these sort of digital aspects. Douglas, you wouldn't mind, just for now, just because, would anyone else like to comment on this first? Andy, please.
No. I think it's a massive problem. What we're doing is we're replacing a political elite with a digital elite, and a particularly politically aware, digitally literate elite, and we're leaving a lot of people behind. It's not enough to be online. We say, oh, we've got 80% of people online, but actually how many of those 80% who are online are effective users online? How many have got the skills and the information literacy that they need to use the internet properly? So we run the risk of making it too hard for people to get involved. But it's already too hard for a lot of people to get involved. You know, the beauty of the internet is instead of having to get to the community centre 2 buses away on a wet Thursday night, after you've got the kids to bed and you've managed to find a babysitter just to talk about the neighbourhood plan, you can do it online. So there's a huge potential, but we've got to do it in a way that we don't leave people behind. We've got to address the issue of internet infrastructure, which is a point that applies to both democracy and the entrepreneurship side of things. We like to kid ourselves in this country that we've got good internet. We haven't. We've got shit internet in this country. It's appalling. It's absolutely embarrassingly bad. You know, it's unbelievably bad internet, and this government is making it worse because they've got no idea what to do about it. They've absolutely no idea. They don't even understand the problem. They say that they look at what's happening in South Korea. Well, guess what? The South Korean government just bloody well sorted it. The same with the digital divide. South Korea taxed the telcos effectively to provide internet cafes in every location so that you didn't have to have internet at home, even though actually in Korean law you're pretty much guaranteed it. You had access wherever you were. They've invested in mobile. We've got to invest in the infrastructure to give us the internet everywhere, so it's on every device. We've got to look at alternative channels. Set-top boxes, mobile, not just the idea of it being on a computer, and we've got to look at education so people know how to use it. But above all, we've got to make it affordable for people. We need to have some way of making it affordable for people to get online. Having the internet is a basic human right in this country.
Can we round that off? I think Paul's itching to make a point.
Yeah, I was just going to say that to date, I think technology is having a positive impact on disadvantaged people. I mean, I've got a severely handicapped brother, and I've got a father who's losing his memory, and both of them really are benefiting from technology at the moment. My brother couldn't write, so he uses a computer really as his main means of communication with the rest of the world, and he's able to do a job for a law firm which he would never be able to do if it wasn't for computers. And my dad, can't use a smartphone, but he's now, there are now these phones where you can track where people are if they get lost and this sort of thing, with big keys and things like that. So I think, as far as I can see, technology is helping a lot of disadvantaged people at the moment.
Douglas, please.
I think that when people complain about the digital divide and make out that somehow the digital revolution is a divisive phenomenon, they're missing the picture, the big picture here. It's an extraordinary levelling phenomenon. Just go back 20 years. Imagine if 20 years ago I'd said to you that in 2013 I could open a laptop, I could type in to this thing called Google a question and get an answer, and it could give me the wisdom of millions of people there on my computer. It couldn't just give me the wisdom of millions of people, it could give me more information at my fingertips than could be found in any government department ever, any government department ever created. The man sitting in the White House and you and I have access to the same amount of information. For the first time in human history, the people at the top and the people at the bottom of the socio-economic pyramid have access to the same amount of knowledge. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. I've come across it in my casework as a constituent in a tiny but telling way. When I first became an MP, a lot of mums and dads who had children with special needs came to see me because they wanted me to give them the specialist knowledge that they needed to make sure that they could fight their way through the bureaucratic hurdles and get their child the education their child deserved. Yeah. Specialist knowledge, letters written by lawyers. Now, I started emailing those letters on email, and I noticed a funny thing happened over the space of about 12 months. People just stopped coming to see me, not because they weren't mums and dads being mistreated by the education system, having to fight it, not because there weren't people challenging the special educational system to get their children what they need, but they were sharing that specialist knowledge amongst themselves, so they didn't need to come to someone like me to get it. Information that was once the preserve of a professional elite or a clique is readily available to everyone. It's a profoundly transformative effect. It's almost uniformly good, unless you're sharing information to do bad things, which some people will always do. But it's an enormous levelling effect. And what I think we're going to see is the political structures have to adapt to a world in which everyone has access to the same sort of information, not just a little elite at the top.
I'll take the gentleman here.
Well, the flip side is, because we've had a lot of negativity about lots of things, but a lot of praise about technology and the internet. The flip side is, I think it does affect entrepreneurship as well as older people. I was born 1958, not 71. I missed more than you did the internet age. I'm having to learn it as I go along now. But I think young people with the internet get exposed to so much crap as well. Just look behind you. Okay, so you got these Twitters. What is that one? Dila, DT, ha ha ha, Kusamagiji. So there is. So there is a need.
So the first lesson is to pick a unique hashtag, which we didn't do.
My point is, the young people are exposed to huge amounts of idiotic information as well as good information, and how do they learn to filter that? Yeah. And how do they spend a lot of time reading all sorts of things which are completely irrelevant.
So that's an interesting challenge to this great benefit of the massive information we have out there. The gentleman who feels there's actually too much information out there. Who'd like to comment on that? Douglas?
Yeah, just very briefly. When was the last time you used Wikipedia?
A few days ago.
When was the last time you used Encyclopedia Britannica?
Yeah.
A long
time. No,
the mob is pretty knowledgeable.
100%. That's the good thing. But it's all the other stuff that constant adverts.
The other stuff. What we're seeing with Twitter. What we're seeing now, with respect, on Twitter you get the news you deserve. The Twitter phenomenon is the brilliance of Twitter is it creates a self-selecting filter to give you the news that you want. We're creating the mechanisms that mean that in a world of limitless information, you're actually coming up with some incredibly sophisticated, crowdsourced filters that allow you to make judgments about the validity of what you're reading on the basis of what tens of thousands of other people think. I don't think information overload or democratic filter controls is the problem. The problem in our society has been when an elite has decided what we should or shouldn't know or read, because they invariably get it wrong.
Hang on though, aren't we just going back to that situation now with Google, when it looks at you and your profile and what you do and decides what results you should get?
Can you hear that? Is that okay? Can we take another,
Can you hear that? Sorry. Douglas's point about going back to having an elite control what information we get, that's what Google's starting to do. It's starting to decide who you are and what information you get to see. So my search results don't look like your search results. You know, we've got to be very careful with this creeping control over the information. And that question there is really important. How do we learn to filter the crap?
Can I involve the gentleman here with the slick back Elvis style?
Yeah, I need to cut up around that. In terms of the gentleman at the front point and what's being raised, I think, you know, I grew up in quite a unique period of time whereby when I was at primary, secondary school, the internet was just becoming big and just becoming great. And what started off as a great situation whereby a lot of it was information, factual information. What's happened in the space of 10 years is that we've gone from a whole vast amount of factual information, and now it's turned into just opinion. And you know, in terms of filtering for children, for teenagers, and for anyone in particular, the problem we face is we can filter so much. We can do what China does, and you know, bring up the little man that comes up and says you're not allowed to look at this site because we haven't checked it yet. Or you can go in the American route and say you're allowed to look at this, but people are going to watch you. But the problem is we can filter so much, but if it is becoming a forum for opinion as opposed to fact, I think we may have a very difficult position in terms of being able to keep that as a democracy more than, you know, just throwing out opinions that we feel need.
Thank you, Douglas.
Very briefly, I think we're worrying unnecessarily. When the printing press came along, right, all these princes in Central Europe looked at these books and thought, we need quality control. If the masses start printing stuff, they're going to believe anything. And we need to license books, and we need to license printing presses, and license newspapers too, because we've got to prevent people from reading stuff that is not proper knowledge. Spot the flaw. It's because the princes in Europe were unable to do that they were unable to stop the spread of knowledge. Knowledge moved to places like the Dutch Republic, where they didn't have draconian licensing for printing. We all accept today that anyone should be free to publish a book, or if they can get an agent, publish a book and find a publisher. And we accept that. We accept that, you know, we can read things and recognise that, you know, a novel by Louise Bagshaw is not telling me how to live my life. It is a work of fiction. You know, we don't need the state or officialdom to tell us what is and what isn't legit. You know, go onto Wikipedia. Yup, there's some stuff there that you probably wouldn't want to include in your PhD thesis, but you know, it's generally speaking pretty reliable. And I think the wisdom of the crowd is generally speaking superior to that of an elite.
I think we're becoming very clever at filtering, you know, because I don't know if anybody else has done this, but you know, I use Google now to check whether something is a scam. So I read recently that there were pyramids in Romania, and it looked very, very convincing. But then you just Google pyramids in Romania, is it a scam or something like that? And you know, you find that but you can find that there are. I think we all get very good and very suspicious at information that we see that doesn't look credible. So I think it's quite, I think it's a skill we probably are developing and need to develop, is how we filter information, what we look at, what sources we use, and all the rest of it. But I wonder whether that's any different to how it's always been. I mean, we've always been bombarded with information from newspapers, magazines, other people. It gets to a point where it doesn't matter that there's more information, because there's always been a load of information anyway.
Can I hear Matthew? Please go ahead.
I'd like to make a point about the upside and downside of the digital revolution in politics. So, upside, we talked about sort of Syria and Facebook and what have you. The ease of setting up campaign groups I talked about. The fact that backbench MPs can have a real voice, you know, to the world. Downside is the sort of micro-targeting, which I talked about before, where if a general election was decided by, let's say, 250,000 voters 10 years ago, now the parties will be scrabbling over the 100,000 voters who will really decide the next election. So a lot of people could be excluded if they're not in those key swing constituencies. That's the downside. And that's why we really need to think about other aspects of democracy, like the open primaries and what have you. Digital isn't enough to open things up. You need to have constitutional changes too.
Thank you. Just keen, we've had some people watching this over the live stream, but as soon as you guys have actually come, I'm keen, I guess you sort of have first dibs, and this gentleman has been very patient.
Well, when we speak about digital democracy, do you think this concept will encourage people to get involved more into lobby activities online?
So will digital democracy encourage more people to get engaged in lobbying activities? So that's probably maybe one for I thought for Matthew. Should we get Matthew first?
Well, I think one of the great successes of the past few years has been the growth of 38 Degrees and the impact that's had in Parliament, and the fact they stopped the quotes privatisation of the forests, the fact they sort of radically altered the government's plans for NHS reform. And that's a great example of a fairly sort of cheap platform actually massively changing things. So
I'm a huge fan of the potential of digital, but let's be realistic. Anything digital doesn't change your motivation to get involved. All it does is lower the barriers. So we make it easy, but we've still got to do stuff to motivate more people to get involved. And that stuff's offline or it's social or however we do it.
Thanks, Andy.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a natural tendency for people to state their point of view anyway, and therefore the main thing the technology will make it apparent to the powers that be what people think.
We're all familiar with the idea of collectivism, where you can get zillions of people to sign a petition or to say something, but for what purpose? Skeptics quite rightly say, yes, but so what? What's going to change? I think Matthew's right. In order to actually allow the full transformative effect of the internet, you need more than just aggregating opinion in collectivism. What you need are basically two things. The first is, and it's a wonky idea, but it's absolutely fundamental. You need to allow everyone to decide who gets to be the party candidates. That is the absolute key change. And if that happens, look, in Italy, Beppe Grillo's party allowed ordinary Italians to vote online to choose their candidates. And that, from the moment that they put up a candidate to be mayor of Parma, explains the success of that organisation. Now, if I was Ed Miliband, I would, in 40, 50 seats that I thought we stood no chance of winning as the Labour Party, I would allow every single person in those constituencies to choose the Labour candidate. When it happens, it's going to be absolutely transformative. That's the first thing we need to change. The second thing is we need to allow people to turn that collectivism into debates and votes in the House of Commons. We need a system that means 1 day a week, MPs should debate and vote on stuff as decided by people online. Now, people shake their heads in horror and think, that means people are going to decide on what the mob wants. Yeah, well, look at the Cabinet Office website. There's already a petition system, hopeless, useless, small print changed by the whips, but there's already a system that allows collectivism online to decide what issues we would like MPs to vote on. Far from actually leading to a restoration of capital punishment, the petition wanting to maintain the ban on capital punishment is almost twice as popular. Far from mob rule, as a libertarian, the only authoritarian proposal I could find on there was the proposal that we have financial literacy in the national curriculum. If that's mob rule, I can live with it. But we do need to change the way the House of Commons operates and the way the political parties operate, so that it's more than just collectivism.
Thank you, Douglas. And just true to my word, I'm going to take a question from a calls himself Gasmoid. He's been watching this on the live stream, so hello Gasmoid. His question is, e-democracy will prove so effective given the failure of the democratic markets lying in tatters. So I suppose his Gasmoid's point is, yeah, sure, that's, getting everyone involved and free to sort of have their say is going to be really helpful when you're looking at a system that's just lying in complete tatters as a result of having not enough regulation and control. I suppose that's his point. Who would like to comment on that?
Can I say one word? Wait for the microphone. Iceland. That worked, didn't it? Let's crowdsource a constitution, and then let's wait while the people with the power just go, nah, I don't want it, and cancel it again. So you've got to check. You've got to be careful. You can do a lot of this stuff. You can crowdsource it. You can do all sorts of clever stuff to involve people. You can make real progress, create real momentum. But there's a hell of a lot of vested interests that don't want it to happen. And if they could do it in Iceland, just think how hard it's going to be to do it here.
I think we're looking at rounding it up now. Given that the voting system took about 6 hours the first time round, probably need to back on with that now. So now we're taking a vote on exactly the same thing, so get your phones at the ready. The first one was to do with digital democracy. Give power to the people. The government have had their day. So if you'd like to text on that now, there's different numbers. And it'll be interesting to see whether there's any change. Five people so far. We have the 4 winning by 60% to 40, 13, and it suddenly changed to 69, 23 again, with 8 abstaining, and so-and-so's fallen in the third. Ooh. 16 people. The gentleman's going to be very upset with this. That's well below 100. Nonetheless, we're doing our best. We're doing our best. 21. Any more? Is anyone else still in the process, or? Okay, so that's interesting. So beforehand we had, there's another one. Beforehand we had 60% before the motion, we had 30% against the motion, and we had 10% abstaining. We've still got a few votes coming in, but you can see that the for has increased to 79%, against has moved to 17%, and abstentions at 4%. So the motion is carried. People power all the way until we've decided in our statistically insignificant sample of people. On to the next one. So the government is not doing enough to support UK entrepreneurs. So text away, SMS, whatever's goes for both. To remind you, beforehand we had 64%, against 24%, and we had 12% abstaining. So there's been a bit of a shift here, by the looks of things. We got 16 people, it's probably about, by my calculation, 8 or 9 of you still itching to scrabbling away with your phones trying to cast your vote. We're up to 21. Interesting. Ooh, level pegging, look at that, it's a dead heat. So, is anyone else still doing it? No? Okay. So, what would your vote be, sir? You think they're all right? Okay. So to remind you, we had for the motion we had 64% for, against 24, and we had 12 abstentions. That's now been turned around, and the motion's been defeated with a 50% to a 42%.
This is the problem with it.
Oh, you can vote more than once, though.
No, you can't. Well,
My phone's out of battery.
you shouldn't. I tested that earlier. You shouldn't be allowed to unless you text in and do it on the browser. Then you can do it twice.
I've just had a response from it which says that the cloudy-based Sauvignon Blanc 2012 has just been released.
Oh, well, well, thank goodness you came, sir. Because that's made it for me. Well, I think it's sort of remained fairly static for a bit. So we can declare that the motion's been defeated. The government is not doing enough to support UK startups. So we started with a bit of optimism around that, and we've decided that frankly, they're just... What? Against the government is... Oh, goodness gracious. Thank God, okay. It's very unimpressed. Right, can I, so without further ado, thank you very much for all of you that came, whether you came via Meetup, Facebook, the Eventbrite, wherever you come from. This has been hosted by Pivotal Tribes, Jonathan Lee, and the Real Debate Club, Marcus Roy. I'd like to thank all the panel members. I'd like to thank Matthew Elliott, Andy Williamson, Douglas Carswell, and Paul Dowling for their fantastic contributions.